Hello and welcome to this Money Matters event with Erin Lowry from the Authors Guild Foundation. This is how to DIY your book launch, whether self-published or traditional. This is a huge topic and we're addressing it as part of our Business Bootcamps for Writers series, where we cover a lot of the fundamentals from start to finish, the whole publishing process. The Bootcamp series is funded in part by Penguin Random House and our donors, so thank you to all of them. And to the audience, if you're not an Authors Guild member, welcome and thanks for following along. We love to put on free programs like this through the Authors Guild Foundation. We do a lot of them. To learn more about what we do, join our newsletter, and consider joining the Guild, you can visit authorsguild.org. And thank you to the audience for submitting questions in advance, really helps us shape the talk. We do have a large crowd, so we'll leave time for Q&A at the end, but we can't possibly address hundreds of questions within an hour, but we'll do our best to address the big issues and as much as we can offer advice that is applicable to most, if not all of you. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Erin Lowry, our moderator. She's the author of the 4-part Broke Millennial series, including Broke Millennial Takes on Investing, and Broke Millennial Talks Money, and her recently published Broke Millennial Workbook, Take Control and Get Your Financial Life Together. She's been featured broadly in print and television and here on numerous Authors Guild webinars, for which we are very grateful. Erin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be back. And let's be honest, as writers, most of us would much rather be dealing with the writing part of the book than trying to handle the marketing and promotion. But unfortunately, the reality for all of us is that we need to promote our own books, no matter your publishing route. So today we're going to explore the importance of strategies behind successful book launches and tours. Now, before we jump in, I do want to say and remind everyone, particularly those of you who might be unfamiliar with previous Money Matters webinars, that we have focused on similarly related topics before, which include newsletters, building a community you can own, and me, myself, and ROI, doing your own marketing. Those can be found on the Authors Guild YouTube channel, as well as links will be included in the follow-up email. Now, we have so much to talk about today, so I want to jump right in and introduce our panelists. I'll start with Kwame Mbalia, whose debut middle grade novel, Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky, was awarded a Coretta Scott King Award. He is also the co-author of The Last Gate of the Emperor and the editor of the #1 New York Times bestselling anthology, Black Boy Joy. Chelsea Fagan is the co-founder and CEO of The Financial Diet. She is the author of 3 books, including A Perfect Vintage, her debut romance novel, which came out this year, and I will also say is self-published, which we'll get into. So thank you both so much for being here. I cannot wait for this talk. And I'll just start off with a kind of simple question. What was the goal for your book tours? Now, let me expand out a little bit. Was the focus to exclusively sell books? Were you trying to secure more media? Did you want to build a following? Did you want to provide a space for your community to get together? There's so many different versions. So Kwame, what were the goals with your multiple book tours?
First of all, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. I would say the goal there was twofold, right? And it might seem kind of contradictory, but it was an immediate kind of impact in sales, but also you want that long tail of being known or coverage or staying in the mind of your target audience, your consumers, right? So obviously you want, the most important time is kind of right around that book launch for your books to be sold. It's new, it's fresh, it's out there. Books are going to come out next week. Books came out last week. So you right there, you want to have the biggest and most significant impact that you can. However, you also want to, as you mentioned, build that following. You want people to continue to buy your book and to continue to talk about your book. And so in my mind, it's twofold. It's trying to both make that splash and then continue to make waves, if I can put some sort of ocean analogy in there for some ridiculous reason.
What about you, Chelsea?
It depended on the nature of the book. So my previous titles were nonfiction, similar to you, Erin. My second book, which was traditionally published, was also about personal finance. And we did an 11-city book tour that was corporate sponsored. We partnered with Intuit, which, you know, they do QuickBooks, TurboTax, Mint, et cetera, RIP Mint. But point being, we really looked at those as an additional stream of revenue through corporate partnerships, and the books were given away, so they didn't count towards our sales. They were bulk buys. You know, to Kwame's point, I think there's obviously like a very substantial level of sort of ambient awareness, and, you know, often media will be able to attend and people are talking about it, posting about it. I think that's very beneficial. In the case of my fiction book, these events were either self-funded through ticket sales, in which case they were more sort of experiential, almost like dinner parties, or they were in direct partnership with the bookstores, wherein people bought a book as sort of the cost of entry. I have personally found that in both cases, like, there can be real advantages. However, in neither case is the actual direct book sales from the tour really that meaningful in terms of overall sales numbers. You know, even like I have an event at a bookstore I just had a Canadian edition of my most recent novel. So I'm doing a few events in Canada, and even the events that are 100+ people, you know, it's nice to sell that amount of books, but when you look at the amount of money you earn from even a large scale event like that in terms of book sales, to me, that's not really a reason enough to pursue it.
Now, Kwame, I know from a previous discussion we've had that school visits are a big part of your ongoing way to promote your books and connect with your readers, kids. So how did you even get started being able to do those, and how do you pitch schools, especially early on?
So you and your publisher can both pitch school visits. And so like right around the time of a book launch, you're pretty much your publicist, your traditionally published person coordinating your launch will reach out to bookstores or libraries or fairs or conferences and pitch you, you know, to come in to speak with, you know, in my case, with the young readers. So that's right around the book launch. Post, you know, months or two later, maybe the marketing budget has run out, you can still pitch yourself to schools. What I'll do is I will either talk with contacts that I've made in the past. For example, there's a school now that oh gosh, where are they based? It's Mountain Standard Time. I'm going to totally, it's the Omar D. Blair School. And I don't remember where they are. They're going to yell at me the next time I do a school visit. But this is the third year in a row that I've done a visit with them. We started during the pandemic. They needed they wanted to still have authors come in and speak. They couldn't go on a field trip. So we did a virtual visit, and it was so fun with the fifth graders that we've made it a tradition. This is my third year doing it. And so that's one way, is to go with past contacts. But also sometimes I'll just pop into a bookstore and be like, hey, who runs your school visit program? Can we talk? What does it look like? And normally they're pretty excited about, like, yeah, we would love to get you into the schools, whether it's Title I schools, private schools, charter schools, what have you. So both you and your publishers can get into it. You just have to be engaging, because, you know, the kids they'll let you know right away if they're not having fun. And I'm all about, I want to make sure that they have fun. Also, I'm sensitive.
I believe Denver, Colorado is the answer to your location question.
Thank you for saving me.
Well, Google works for everything. So, you know, I think what's interesting, if you go the traditional publishing route, a lot of times the publisher will provide some sort of timeline for you about, like, this is when we expect manuscript, this is when we're going to start pre-orders, this is when we're going to do this version of publicity. Well, when you're self-publishing, that's all very much self-directed. So Chelsea, I'd love to hear more from you about maybe just kind of giving us a high-level overview of your timeline for preparing to announce, how you handled pre-order incentives, and then actually dealing with the book tour itself for a perfect vintage. Got unmuted.
Muted. I really tried to sort of take what worked from the traditional publishing experience. The book, The Financial Diet, sold, I believe, just under 200,000 copies in English so far, and then it's been translated quite a bit. So we definitely had a lot of marketing insights from that. Now, to be fair, marketing really varies by genre. So a fiction, a romance novel is going to be very different from what works for a nonfiction book. But that being said, there were still some very basic benchmarks. So the first thing I did was do my full business case in terms of understanding how many copies I needed to sell to break even on my investment. And my goal was to hit that number on publication date. For me, that number was, I believe it was about 5,000 copies sold. I ended up selling about 7,000 that first week. So I was able to break even that first week. And that number, again, is going to vary. I invested quite a bit financially into the book. Many self-published authors invest quite a bit less. Also, for example, if you're doing something like Kindle Unlimited or something where you're not necessarily working in copies sold, that can vary. But in my opinion, you generally want to base your marketing strategy around your initial financial goals. And then from there, kind of looking at the lead up to it and what worked traditionally. I personally believe that a lot of traditionally published books have too large of a lead time in terms of pre-order. For example, our company, The Financial Diet, we have another book coming out with Penguin Random House in April. We have had the pre-order link for many months. We're not releasing it until right before the holidays when people are doing holiday shopping. And we're going to have a very concentrated window of pre-order to get a lot of energy, which was the strategy I used. I only had a 12-week pre-order period. And that, I think, worked really well because it was a nice balance between, there was a sense of urgency. People could really envision when they would have the book. It was also seasonally much more adapted. And similarly, that's the window that I had on NetGalley. That was the window I had for leading up for early reviews. And then from launch date, I wanted to structure the tour. I did 9 events for this tour. And then I'm now having the ones in Canada. But for the initial tour, it was 9 events. And I started them on publication date. I had a launch party here in New York that was much more like a party. And then I had all of the subsequent events within, I would say, 6 weeks of publication, just to keep that really strong energy going. And I personally think that worked very well, but I also, again, think it really depends on how much you're looking at investing, because the beauty of self-publishing is, you only have to take as much risk as you want to.
Now, as evidenced by what we're doing right here, we are very much still living in a virtual events world, and will continue to do so, it seems. So when it comes to a book tour, are virtual events worth prioritizing, or is in-person really the only way to kind of move the needle when it comes to both sales and social media shares? So Kwame, let's start with you.
That's a great question, because I'm on, I hop on both sides of the fence in relation to the answer. For one, hosting or holding a virtual event allows me to reach a bunch of different schools and programs that I just, just too expensive to travel to, or might not be in the budget. Some successful events I've gone through a bookstore where they will host it, and then they will invite classrooms from different, 4 or 5 or 6 schools in the area. So you end up having a pretty good crowd, and you get to talk and chat with them and engage with them. And the sales, again, are, in this case, almost not the point. It's more about building up an enthusiasm with them. Because again, I'm talking to 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. They don't exactly have buying power, right? But what they do have is enthusiasm. And so if they go home, or if they and their friends go home, or their classroom sends a note home, and they're full of excitement about reading, not too many parents, shy away from that. You're excited about buying a book? Okay, all right, that's better than Robux or the latest PS5 game. So let's invest in that. So it's all about building an enthusiasm there. On the other hand, I don't know if you can tell, I am the type of person where my enthusiasm is really evident. And when I am in front of you, it becomes readily apparent. And it's almost also about kind of the side conversations that we're having. that make that connection between myself and the reader even more important, because that's not how you just build a reader. That's how you build a fan base, right? Is that connection. So if I'm in front of you and I'm giving my presentation, and then off on the side, we're having a little fun and games about, maybe you're wearing, just going back to Denver, Colorado, maybe you have a Broncos shirt on, right? And I'm a Chiefs fan, we're having a little tete-a-tete here, right? That connection is building throughout the presentation, right? And so that's just something that can't necessarily happen through a virtual event. So I love the mix. I love the fact that virtual events make my presentations accessible globally, because I've done things from London and as well as over here in the United States. But also I believe that in person I can let my silliness really thrive, and that's really important to me.
Well, and just a quick follow-up too on bringing up the schools. How often are those in person versus virtual at this point?
Well, I mean, it's easier to do virtual. However, the schools are almost eager to do in person, just because it one, I mean, I don't remember, I can't speak to everyone on the panel here, but I didn't have a school visit from an author, when I was in school. And so to have that person come in talking about literacy and books and about a subject matter that the students are engaged with, whether it's action or adventure or fantasy or what have you, teachers and administrators and staff really almost seem to prefer the in-person visit. But of course, then you have to weigh that against costs and everything like that. So depending on what day it is, on which side of the bed I got up on, will tell you whether I prefer virtual or in person, but both of them really have their uses.
Chelsea, what about you? Virtual and in person, how do you decide which way to go and which one, or do you feel both have a meaning right now?
I would say that more generally, anything to do with events, virtual or in person, I personally look at as just completely supplementary to a book marketing strategy. It is definitely not the majority of my personal book marketing strategy. That being said, when I do them, I really only look at virtual events as being essentially added value in some way outside of, like, it's not as if you were going to a bookstore and you're doing a reading or a Q&A. For example, in my day job here, we do quite a lot of virtual workshops, classes, things like that. So the virtual things that I held around my book were things like, I did a workshop all about how to self-publish properly and, everything you kind of need to know about it. That also had a corporate sponsor. So I was able to offer it for free. I've also done very, very small niche paid events with small groups of people who are looking for particular advice on, specific things. But point being, I think, at least for me personally, I don't really seek out virtual events that are just like you were saying, Kwame, like very casual, having a kind of nice conversation. I look at them as more like a resource, like I'm almost wanting to take a class or learn something. So I try to frame any virtual stuff that I do that way. And I really look at it as, I'm not directly trying to sell books. I'm just trying to get people more interested in myself, and then hopefully by extension, the books that I write.
Now, Kwame, you mentioned already about your target demographic not necessarily having buying power, but they have enthusiasm. And I think that to a degree, influencers today are we have enthusiasm of our marketing world. It's somebody who can maybe be out there word of mouth promoting your book. Now, in some ways that happens organically, and in other ways it's because of a deliberate strategic action on the part of an author or publisher. So I'm very curious to ask both of you about experiences working with influencers, if you found that to be beneficial, and what are some of the strategies that you use to even get your foot in the door with talking to people in the first place. So Chelsea, we'll start with you.
Influencers were by far the number one driver of sales for me, much, much more so than any kind of institutional media. It's nice to have the clips, for sure. But I have found personally, no matter how prestigious the publication or how large the audience of a given publication, placements in publications, to me, in my experience, do not move the needle nearly to the same extent that a really relevant book talker or booktuber talking about the book does. So a huge part of my strategy with this book, and I do want to be clear, I see people sort of alluding to this in the Q&A. I think even as someone who has published traditionally many titles that were, or several titles, and is in the process again, for books that were fairly big launches for the publisher, they do a lot less than you think that they would in terms of marketing, coordinating events. I've yet to meet a publisher who will pay for a national book tour. I've yet to meet a publisher who is going to be, as comprehensive as I would be when it comes to, influencer outreach and things like that. So one of the first things that I did with my marketing partner, to the point of this chat, I didn't have a publicist, I had a marketing partner, and there is a pretty meaningful difference. But suffice to say, the first thing that we did was create a 7,000 cell Excel sheet with 15 tabs of every different influencer from the four corners of the earth. And I personally, we probably sent out, hundreds and hundreds of physical and emailers to these various, book bloggers and things like that. And that to me was by far the cornerstone of the marketing strategy.
And I just want to clarify for folks, book talk being book influencers on TikTok, booktubers being book influencers on YouTube. Just want to make sure we're clear. Got to do a little translation sometimes. Kwame, do you have any experiences with influencers, either directly or just seeing somebody get into your book and then just word of mouth spreading it on social media?
Yeah, I'm glad you added that. So I have not directly reached out to influencers. Now my publishers have. So Disney, for the Tristan Strong series, reached out to several. They had I have my screen blurred so you can't see it, but different kind of book, what do you call it, book boxes with a little swag inside, and a book and a description and a pitch and everything. And so that's that went out to different influencers that kind of spread the news and everything. But I think three particular instances I could think of were more organic, where they weren't influencers necessarily, but people with influence. So a celebrity or something. David Banner, who is a rap producer / rapper, had a copy of my book that he posted on Instagram Reel. Michael B. Jordan saw the cover and posted it on his stories. And then Whoopi Goldberg, when she was on The View, I want to say, just had her list of books that she was looking for as gifts. They were talking about gifts for your nieces and nephews and so on and so forth. And so in each one of those instances, the just exposure, you think that you've gotten all the publicity and marketing that's possible, and then someone mentions it, and all of a sudden you have all of these mentions and tags and stuff, and I've seen more of kind of the word of mouth that you were referring to, that impact spread more so than or maybe I don't have the actual analytics for it, but more so than what I believe actual influencers may have done. But you can't schedule that. You can't, that's more of that organic spread, right? And that's something that it's more being ready when something like that happens. So you see Michael B. Jordan's story, and then you're instantly in the replies with a link to where someone can purchase it or buy it or whatever, or to your website or anything like that. And so yeah, that's more been my experience.
Chelsea, you've exploded the Q&A by using the term marketing publicist versus a partner, versus a publicist. So if you could be so kind as to explain, what is the difference? How would you qualify a publicist versus a marketing partner? Why did you choose the marketing partner route? And how do you recommend finding someone?
Yes. Thank you all for asking. That's why I raised my hand when I saw that going off. I should have just explained it in my initial answer. So similar to manager versus agent, in our current digital era, the distinctions are becoming more and more blurred, right? There used to be much more of a distinct separation between these types of sort of supplementary roles when it comes to creatives. Now they're getting more and more kind of enmeshed. However, in the case of, speaking generally, in the case of a marketing partner versus a publicist, publicists, for the most part, and I've worked with publicists at various points throughout my career on different things. Generally, publicists are focused on what is called earned media. That basically means media that you are not paying for. Usually that comes in the form of traditional media placements. So magazines, newspapers, TV, radio, that kind of stuff. They also generally don't work with things like, for example, securing partnerships with brands, with corporations, with restaurants, with, all of the other third parties that will often help facilitate marketing. A marketing partner, and I did interview several publicists for my book before ultimately going with a marketing partner. In the case of a marketing partner, so I really marketing in general has a lot broader of a definition than just publicity, right? Marketing can include publicity. It can include outreach to, more traditional publications. And it does, and it did for me, but it also can have a much more comprehensive view of what marketing and partnerships within marketing can entail. So for example, my marketing partner, and for financial transparency, I paid her a flat fee plus she earns a percentage on all of my royalties. So we have sort of an ongoing relationship, and all of the women that I worked with on the book are profit sharing in some way, but that's the model that we use because it's a very sort of comprehensive partnership. But so in addition to the traditional media outreach, she also handled basically 100% of my influencer outreach. She also coordinated with a lot of my event locations. She also emailed bookstores. She also secured corporate partnerships for gifting. For example, one of the sort of little campaigns that I ran for my romance novel, because it came out at the beginning of summer, was partnering with a swimsuit brand to put a copy of my novel in all of the boxes that they were sending out to their influencers with swimwear in them. She facilitated that. So for me anyway, publicity is much, much more focused on that earned media, that traditional media placement and communications, whereas marketing is more comprehensive and, in my opinion, a bit more adapted to the very kind of diffuse nature of how marketing for a book actually happens in 2023.
Well, that really tees us up for a conversation kind of about social media's role in general when we talk about book launches, book tours, and whether it's because you have reached out directly to influencers or kind of in Kwame's experience where someone who's super famous might see your book, get attracted to it, post about it, and still influencing in a very certain way. I think that what can feel almost demoralizing sometimes for either debut authors or even established authors who just haven't necessarily invested in social media is feeling like, all right, well, X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, as I think we should all be legally required to call it, is definitely not what it used to be. And social media in general can feel stressful, whether it's like TikTok, Instagram, what have you, to start building a platform. So this is a very long-winded way to ask both of you, which platforms have you used to build brands and to promote your books? And what would be your advice to folks who maybe either don't really want to, but recognize that it's important? Where should people be concentrating their energy? So Kwame, I'll start with you on this one.
I kind of want to put a qualifier and say that, so I'll just say it. I kind of want to put a qualifier and say that you should have your own, website and where all of your information is, but also like a newsletter, so that you are not specifically reliant on one kind of fractured social media ecosystem, because not everyone is great at everything. I have most of my followers on X, and a lot of them, I would say almost 50% of them are like teachers and librarians from schools and public librarians, which is great because those, in my particular view, those are like the gatekeepers. They're the ones who are passing in my book out or pushing my book to the actual readers, because technically the majority of my readers shouldn't be on social media at all. Technically, I think it's 13. We know the reality, but you know, because I need to keep appearances up. Technically, my readers shouldn't be on social media at all. So I rely on the gatekeepers to provide that information to pass that information along. And so for me, I am on X, Instagram, and I lurk on TikTok. I do not post, but I stay abreast of I try to stay abreast of everything that's kind of happening. I personally want to get better at Instagram and doing Instagram, you know, reels and so on and so forth, just because of how their algorithm is set up, which is a whole nother, you know, webinar that we could host. So for me personally, how I built my following on X before it kind of disintegrated a little bit was just posting about the life, and I still do it, kind of like the life of a writer. What am I doing? You know, this is my writing process. This is what's happening right now. And then information like this is where I'll be, pictures from an event. If you want to get your book signed, or I've left, you know, 10 copies of Tristan at this bookstore, or I'll be visiting this library. So just kind of like what's happening with me and around me. And not trying to force anything. I think a lot of times what will happen is that you'll have, you know, someone who's trying to build their following, and it's all just, you can tell it's all kind of just like a crafted persona that's being kind of forced out or whatever, and it's not natural. It feels more like a brand trying to, you know, hello fellow kids, you know, their audience or whatever sometimes. And so for me, I just always encourage people to just like, first of all, only share what you're comfortable with. But, you know, people want to know, like, what's it like, you know, being a writer? As someone who is a fan of reading and writing, I want to know what other people are reading and writing, and what's it like? What's your process? Are you a hand writer? Are you a scrivener? Are you, you know, unfortunately tied to Microsoft Word? Like, what's happening here? I hope no one takes offense to that, but I stand by it. That's my soapbox. So for me, I'm just share what you're comfortable with, pull back the curtain a little bit, and then post regularly. A lot of people will post and then forget, and then 2 months later we'll come back in and, oh yeah, you know, and that's something where I'm like, I'm trying to find out more information, and I'm like, you posted in March of 21, and then, you know, yesterday, you know, that's not enough to like drive me towards engagement and wanting to follow you to figure out what's happening with your writing process and the books that you're presenting.
Listen, I felt a little attacked by the Microsoft Word comment, as did I saw some folks in the chat. We can't help what our publishers require of us, you know? So it is what it is. But Chelsea, over to you on which social media platforms have you focused on, and which do you recommend focusing on in order to promote books?
Not going to like this one, Erin. We've talked about this in person many times. If you're marketing a book to young women, TikTok, and it's not even close. I'm a data nerd, a huge data nerd. I am on top of my analytics like nobody's business. I notice every little micro movement. There are several reasons for this. Also, people in the chat who are asking about numbers, you can ask anything to do with actual numbers. There's no number I don't share, so I'm totally fine with that. But as far as the efficacy of TikTok as a social platform, so I am a very sort of heavy user of most social platforms. We have over 1 million subscribers on YouTube. My company has just under 1 million on Instagram. I have about 50,000 personally on Instagram. And you do get engagement on those platforms. I don't want to dismiss them. It's not as if they're not worth anything. But YouTube isn't the best platform for marketing something like this, because the content is just not really adapted to the level of conversion and interaction in the same way a social platform. People come, you know, our videos are an hour long. People are coming there to watch a piece of content. And yes, we'll usually place ads on our videos, but it's not really a place to have, you know, a very direct call to action for something, to share a short review, to get to know an author. YouTube is great for creating content, and I watch a ton of YouTube, but it's not really a wonderful marketing tool in my opinion. And again, I use it a lot. I just wouldn't necessarily recommend focusing on it for book marketing specifically. Instagram can be great, right? However, Instagram as an app is an app in decline. It is not growing. The algorithm is much, much harder to optimize for, especially because it's very confused about its identity. It used to be a photo sharing platform. Now it's trying to be TikTok. So it's very difficult to optimize content for Instagram. And again, it's seeing a much, much smaller level of, I wouldn't say it's necessarily an attrition of users, but it's definitely not growing in the way TikTok is. TikTok is growing massively as a platform. For reference, I've been using Instagram for a decade. I have 50,000 followers. I've been using TikTok for under a year. I opened it specifically to help market my book. I have 150,000 followers in that time. And the engagement is orders of magnitude higher on the same content or on similar content. Also, lastly, as far as TikTok conversions and the strategy of the kind of content that one posts, every so often, not very often, but every so often, I will do something that is a sort of direct appeal to my book. That almost never moves the needle. It's good to occasionally refresh people's minds that it exists. But I always think, and I really think this is true of basically any social media marketing strategy, but especially as it pertains to positioning yourself as an author and creating a community, is you really want to be leaning into the kind of content that is organically adapted to the medium and that is successful on its own terms. My metric of success for TikTok is I look at how many people are coming to my book's website every week from TikTok. For context, it's about 10 times more than the number of people who come from Instagram, even though the link tree is the same, the information is the same, I post on both. It's about 10 times more, despite only being 3 times more followers. And that is just from people passively clicking on it because they found my content and were interested in it otherwise, and they want to go see, well, what is she doing? I have that. Usually I'll have my latest video essay, a few other things. So it's really just you're creating essentially a very large funnel at the top, and then you're slowly funneling people down. For reference, I get about 500 to 800 clicks a week on my link tree to my book, the vast majority of that being from TikTok. Again, almost never directly promoting the book itself. So I would highly recommend it, again, especially not just because of the way the content is very adapted to creating that easy community and to getting to know people in bite-sized ways, but also, again, because it is a growth platform as opposed to some of these other ones. Like, I don't even know what's happening on X anymore. I stopped using it like almost a year ago.
None of us do. I also think it's important. Someone brought up in the Q&A about like YouTube can be a great place for podcasts, for people to engage with podcasts, because then it's a more visual medium instead of just audio, listening to it on your phone. And yes, absolutely true. However, I think in this particular context, with podcasts, unless you have your own, you're very much subject to other people allowing you and platforming you onto their podcasts. Where in this particular discussion, especially around social media, a lot of this is around what is to some degree within your control. So yes, YouTube is great for that, but like Instagram and TikTok are an entirely different ballgame. Great if you have a YouTube channel that's thriving, but that's not quite the same, I would say, especially based on what Chelsea was just explaining. Now, I feel like I can sense it coming through that there are folks who listen to this, especially just sharing follower numbers, Chelsea, who are like, well, mine looks nothing like that. And so therefore, how is this going to be helpful to me? I know a lot of people can feel very demoralized right off the bat at the idea of not having either a large social media following or not having a large newsletter following. And again, I like that Kwame brought up newsletters earlier. I think it's important to kind of push on that a little bit because you own that compared. And somebody brought up Substack in the Q&A, newsletter. But my question to both of you is, how can whether debut or an experienced author compensate or overcome not having a large social media following or newsletter? Kwame, I'll start with you.
I think, for me personally, this is most of my this sounds so weird out loud, following came from a single tweet that had nothing to do with anything, really. It was a horribly constructed joke of a tweet about how quickly bananas ripen and then go bad, right? It has nothing to do with anything. And it got like 500,000 likes. And I think my follower list, well, it ballooned, right? I don't know if those people are still here or not, if they were bots or what. But that's what happened. And for me, it was just a sign that like nothing has changed, nothing had changed in terms of myself and what I was putting out, like what I was writing, the books that I was talking about, or my reading or my content. It was a 2 a.m. tweet that has nothing to do with what Kwame Mbalia stands for. And so just all of that to say that numbers, you can fall into that trap of like, I'm not who I'm supposed to be because my follower count isn't here, or publishers want my following count to be here before, they'll even look at me to try and, publish nonfiction or fiction or whatever it is these days. They want me to handle most of my marketing. They want me to get on TikTok and drive, sales or what have you. And there are some publishers who will do that, not to discourage you, but that's not gonna, at the end of the day, what I tell, people who ask me for advice is that the number one thing that you can control is you can write a book. You can write the heck out of your book, right? That is what, because at the end of the day, when they come to that, if you drive all of that engagement and they come to your book and it's trash, like they will feel so betrayed, right? And that lingers more so than, it overrides the engagement that you're trying to promote. So for me, I'd say, if you're the best thing that you can do is keep posting, right? People will eventually, it may trickle in, it may balloon. People will eventually, start to follow you. They won't if you don't post, and it's that simple. They'll have nothing to follow. So, if you're worried about your follower count, keep posting, but don't let that distract you from the end goal, which is, having the best possible book that you can have. That's what you can focus on if you're worried about, in my opinion, if you're worried about, follower count in this day and age.
Thanks. And Chelsea, before I kick over to you, I want to acknowledge we are not naming all the social media platforms. And somebody did bring up LinkedIn can be very useful depending on your genre. So there are some people for whom LinkedIn is actually a big mover and also connects you to folks that could either kind of be influencers or connect you to other opportunities. So just want to put that out there. Chelsea, what are your thoughts about folks who might feel a little demoralized about their current follower count, and what can they do?
Well, I won't gaslight them, right? They're not wrong. It definitely helps to have a large platform, but some people have been pointing this out in the chat, and it's worth noting, like 1% of a following is considered a good conversion rate. So if you have 100,000 followers, is that 1,000 conversion? Oh my God, I'm not me backing myself into a corner with how bad I am at math. Okay, if you have 100 followers, one of them would buy the book, and that's considered good, right? It's a 1% conversion rate is considered good. So even for people with large platforms, you're not going to have a very successful book, depending on what your goals are. You're not going to have a very successful book if you're only limiting your strategy to your own followers. I personally look at social media as serving two functions. One, you're creating a kind of core community of evangelists, of people who really engage with your work on a high level, who you are in some level of community with, who you interact with, who you share with on a much higher level, who then again, in the case of perhaps promoting your book, become evangelists themselves, who post about it, who share, who read it, who buy it, etc. But then the other thing is you're sort of just kind of casting a very, very wide net for people to come across you more passively. I think both of those are worthy reasons to pursue at least one social platform. And I do think I personally am just a very pragmatic person. So although I creatively do really enjoy the exercise of writing books, I've written quite a few at this point. I've just personally never identified with the mentality of like, I agree totally, Kwame, that the most important thing is to create a book that is the best one you can make and that you really feel good about. But I do think sometimes writers, authors lose the focus that there's very little reason to spend, if you're not going to be able to share these ideas with anyone, if you're not going to be able to reach anyone with these ideas and with this writing, it's a bit of a wasted opportunity. And I think a lot of authors really look down on or totally eschew the idea of trying to build a social media community, because they're like, I'm here to write, I'm not here to do all that. And I understand that to an extent, and it may not be the most natural fit, although depending on which platform you use, you can usually find something that's well adapted to you. I personally believe that if you are investing seriously in your book, whether financially, personally, creatively, you owe it to yourself to at least attempt to find some kind of community that you can build to help you get those ideas out there. And so even if it is demoralizing at first, and it always is, trust me, we all started at 0 followers, it's still very much worth doing, with the understanding that the purpose of your core community is not, that's not where the vast majority of your sales are going to come from. You're going to still have to sell way outside of your own networks. The point is, it helps really create a launching pad and a kind of seeding device.
You know, we've talked a lot about social media, which I agree really helps move the needle. But whether it's because your ego wants it or because your publisher wants it, a lot of people do focus on securing traditional media in order to launch and promote a book. So I'd be curious to know from both of you, do you think that there is still value in focusing on traditional media coverage? And if so, not to disillusion anyone with a traditional publisher, not always the greatest at securing it for you. How do you go about securing the media for yourself? Kwame, we'll start with you.
So I've had two, I'll use 2 examples that feel like they came about sort of differently. The first, I don't think would not have been possible had not Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky ended up on the New York Times bestselling list, right? So it ended up on the bestselling list. I think it was like number 7 or something. And it was on there for a couple weeks. And a local reporter or a local journalist pitched to our local paper, the News and Observer. So it got, you know, I had a little blurb in the art section there. And then she, because she enjoyed the book when she read it, recommended it to our local news station. I can't remember the station right now. I don't know if it was Fox or CBS or what, but it was our local news station. And so we did a Sunday little sit down with her for my local news station. And then from there, she passed me on to the sister radio station. And so I did a little spot where I went on the radio and read from the book, and they enjoyed it. And so it was kind of like a trickle up affair where those connections were made. And at each stop, that traditional coverage would give me like a little bit more buzz. And then the book would be back on the, you know, on the list next week, on the New York Times bestselling list the following week. And so it would build from there. And it got to the point where people who were not the target audience for the book, they were calling me, you know, because at the time I was still working full time. They would call me on my professional line, be like, hey, we saw you here, or hey, we saw you here, we're buying a couple there, or whatever. And so that kind of just happened organically because the book made it onto the list, and so it built out from there. With Black Boy Joy, we had a publicist, and his name's Chris Cam, and Chris worked extensively behind the scenes to, you know, get us kind of launch interviews. It was an anthology, so getting groups of us together. And so we were invited to go to Brooklyn, New York to film something for CBS Good Morning, which went on, played. And again, that generated, I think that was probably one of the bigger reasons why Black Boy Joy was a #1, New York Times bestseller, was because from that nationally televised thing. So there were 2 different instances where, one that happened, or one that was deliberate and intentional, and one where it just kind of, I felt like I was stumbling upwards of having that traditional coverage. And so I do think it's important. And I think almost, I can't reach out to CBS Good Morning. I could, but I don't think it would work. But the connections that I made locally with the local traditional media coverage, I still have those. And I still share, I still pass along, hey, I have this book coming out next year. Hey, we're starting this imprint with Disney. All of these different notes so that we can continue to build upon that relationship and still get that coverage going forward.
I love that. Chelsea, thoughts on securing traditional media for your book launch?
As I've said, I personally have not had the experience, either traditionally or self-published, that they moved a ton of copies as compared to more grassroots influencer marketing. Like for me, by far the largest single jump I saw was a booktuber who has a very large following, who did 2 videos about it, in a broader list of other titles she liked. But suffice to say, I have personally, and my books have been featured in almost every major publication you could think of at this point. I've also done a lot of interviews with different major publications, in addition to the book itself being featured. I have personally not found that they move the needle. I think they can. I think if you're getting on the Today Show, if you're getting on, if you're if Oprah talks about you, yeah, you're going to sell a hell of a lot of books. But I have not found that they make a huge difference. What I will say, though, is as someone who frequently leverages corporate partnerships to fund a lot of my book marketing and book tour efforts, I find that having, being able to put in my PowerPoint deck, a really impressive collage of every publication that's featured me or highlighted me as a book of the summer or whatever the superlative might be, it tends to have a level of gravitas that helps you leverage other things, even if it doesn't translate directly to book sales. But that being said, I look at them again as being supplementary and having other benefits outside of just moving copies. Because again, keep in mind, oftentimes when you are being mentioned by a larger publication or on television, if you're on television, there's not a link to click. If you're being mentioned in the New York Times and someone's reading it, they have to take another additional step to get to your book. So I say all of that to say I think it can be beneficial, but at least in my experience, it wasn't super directly correlated to book sales.
Well, I'm going to come, we only have a few minutes left here, but I do want to tie back into budget for launching. And I want to start first, Chelsea, with, you just mentioned corporate sponsors. We've had a few requests to talk a little bit about how that happens. So you just gave a little bit of insight about creating a deck, leveraging places you've been featured. So what are some of the ways that you have secured corporate sponsorship, and what does that look like when it comes to a book launch?
By sending thousands of emails. No, so I do have the advantage, my sort of day job and most of my professional experience has been in media, and therefore to an extent media and ad sales, which is what this is, right? When you get a corporate sponsor to give you money in order to be associated with whatever you're doing, that's an advertisement. So I'm very experienced in the process of reaching out to sometimes it's corporate sponsors, sometimes it's venues who are going to provide, a venue or, food and beverage for free. Like at our book tour, we partnered with a liquor company to provide the bar for a lot of our events. I generally recommend and again, I cannot stress enough, even with a traditional publisher, it is exceedingly rare that a traditional publisher will pay to finance a whole large tour. That very rarely happens. So even at a trad publisher, you're likely going to have to try and find some outside source of financing. The most simple way I can put it is you gather an email list of people that are relevant for you to reach out to. So for example, I've partnered with food and beverage. For financial books, we partnered with financial companies. For my launch for, a summer romance, I partnered with swimwear companies. You come up with a relevant list of partners to work with. You find their emails by digging online, and either yourself or your marketing partner, or if you don't have one yet and want to look more legit than you are, you make up sales at your book website or partnerships at your bookwebsite.com, and you can still do it yourself, but look like you're a different person. And you email them. And it's a very straightforward proposition in the email. I'm doing X or Y. I would love to partner with you on it. this is what you would get out of it. This is what I'm asking for. And I usually attach what we call a media kit, which is usually just a PowerPoint deck with some top line information about you, about the book, about, you know, some other examples of things you've done, places you've been featured, etc. And through brute force and reaching out to a lot of people, you eventually, hopefully, find brands and partners and venues and other things like that who are willing to work with you, ranging from gifting some free product or hosting you all the way up to, you know, financing an 11-city book tour.
I'll say I used all those strategies for my corporate sponsors for my book tour as well. So in these last 2 minutes, it's got to be quick, succinct answers, which I know can be tough for the question I'm about to ask. But again, let's talk about money right here at the end. I would love to hear from each of you a realistic budget that you would recommend a first-time author sets in order to promote and launch their own book, either money that they are putting in or money that they're taking from an advance if they were lucky enough to have one. Kwame, I'm going to kick it over to you first.
It's for me personally, I qualify it always like it really depends on your budget and what you can get away with. I did an estimate for something that I want to do in the future, which is, you know, bookmarks, stickers, one of those retractable banners that I can take with me, because right now I'm juggling 5 or 6 giant poster boards when I'm doing school visits. And so my budget came to be around, I want to say like $1,500, budgeting for my gas traveling locally around for school visits, and, you know, contracting people to design, you know, you can do it yourself. I'm terrible. So contracting people to design bookmarks and art and stickers and so forth, things that I can use to hand out to my primary readership, who will then take it to the people who hold the money and actually get the book to purchase. So that could be a little different, like in terms of you're ordering swag, if you're budgeting for travel for your launch, if you have to book a hotels, motels, gas, airfare, or what have you, that's going to range. I'm just thinking of locally traveling for myself in North Carolina. So I budgeted $1,500 to cover, I think I got like 900 stickers, 200 bookmarks, a couple posters to hand out signed as giveaways, and then gas, and then a couple of hotel stays for remote visits or whatnot. Again, it's all going to differ, and it's all about who you're aiming this for and what you're trying to get out of it. And since I write for kids, you know, it's got to be attention grabbing. It has to remain. So I'm sorry for parents for the stickers that they're going to put in places stickers should probably not go. But that's what I found has really worked to kind of regain and keep and retain, I should say, the engagement that the readers have.
Thanks so much, Chelsea.
That was not quick at all. I'm sorry.
That's all right. We got a minute.
At least 10% of your advance, at least $1,000 if you're self-published, period.
Love it. Well, thank you all so much. I know we had so many questions come in. We couldn't get to all of them. I've already jotted down a bunch of ideas for future Money Matters webinars based on topics that really were definitely hot button issues. I appreciate you all for tuning in, and I will turn it over to Johnny.
Thank you, Kwame, Chelsea, and Erin, so much for this. Yeah, a lot of information. I'm sure we'll be booking more. And also, I want to say we've been conducting a pilot program of a marketing and publicity benefit for Authors Guild members called Authors Guild Launchpad. The webinars that we've already done are available on our website. If you're logged in as a member, you do have to join for these resources. But we hope to produce a really full-fledged kind of program where you can get personalized advice for marketers and publicists when you have a book forthcoming. So check out our website and get in touch with us for more info about that. All right. Thank you all so much. This has been great. Take care.